All right, boys and girls, the time has finally come. Our championship video. On the left side of the bracket, Ferdinand beat the cat who walked across France. And on the right side, we have Adelita and the Bicycle Man, and the winner was the Bicycle Man. So for our final matchup, we have the story of Ferdinand versus the Bicycle Man.
The Story of Ferdinand by Monroe Leaf and drawings by Robert Lawson. Once upon a time in Spain, there was a little bull, and his name was Ferdinand. All the other little bulls he lived with would run and jump and butt their heads together. But not Ferdinand. He liked to just sit quietly and smell the flowers. He had a favorite spot out in the pasture under a cork tree. It was his favorite tree, and he would sit in its shade all day and smell the flowers. Sometimes his mother, who was a cow, would worry about him. She was afraid he would be lonesome all by himself. "Why don't you run and play with the other little bulls and skip and butt your head?" she would say. But Ferdinand would shake his head. "I like it better here, where I can sit just quietly and smell the flowers." His mother saw that he was not lonesome, and because she was an understanding mother, even though she was a cow, she let him just sit there and be happy. As the years went by, Ferdinand grew and grew until he was very big and strong. All the other bulls who had grown up with him in the same pasture would fight each other all day. They would butt each other and stick each other with their horns. What they wanted most of all was to be picked to fight at the bullfights in Madrid. But not Ferdinand. He still liked to sit just quietly under the cork tree and smell the flowers. One day, 5 men came in very funny hats to pick the biggest, fastest, roughest bull to fight in the bullfights in Madrid. All the other bulls ran around, snorting and butting, leaping and jumping, so the men would think that they were very, very strong and fierce and pick them. Ferdinand knew that they wouldn't pick him, and he didn't care, so he went out to his favorite cork tree to sit down. He didn't look where he was sitting, and instead of sitting on the nice cool grass in the shade, he sat on a bumblebee. Well, if you were a bumblebee and a bull sat on you, what would you do? You would sting him, and that is just what the bee did to Ferdinand. Wow, did it hurt! Ferdinand jumped up with a snort. He ran around puffing and snorting, butting and pawing the ground as if he were crazy. The 5 men saw him, and they all shouted with joy. Here was the largest and fiercest bull of all, just the one for the bullfights in Madrid. So they took him away for the bullfight day in a cart. What a day it was! Flags were flying, bands were playing, and all the lovely ladies had flowers in their hair. They had a parade into the bull ring. First came the banderilleros, with long sharp pins with ribbons on them to stick in the bull and make him mad. Next came the picadores, who rode skinny horses, and they had long spears to stick in the bull and make him madder. Then came the matador, the proudest of all. He thought he was very handsome, and bowed to the ladies. He had a red cape and a sword, and was supposed to stick the bull last of all. Then came the bull, and you know who that was, don't you? Ferdinand. They called him Ferdinand the Fierce, and all the banderilleros were afraid of him, and the picadores were afraid of him, and the matador was scared stiff. Ferdinand ran to the middle of the ring, and everyone shouted and clapped because they thought he was going to fight fiercely and butt and snort and stick his horns around. But not Ferdinand. When he got to the middle of the ring, he saw the flowers in all the lovely ladies' hair, and he just sat down quietly and smelled. He wouldn't fight and be fierce no matter what they did. He just sat and smelled, and the banderilleros were mad, and the picadores were madder, and the matador was so mad he cried because he couldn't show off with his cape and sword. So they had to take Ferdinand home. And for all I know, he is sitting there still, under his favorite cork tree, smelling the flowers just quietly. He is very happy. The end.
The Bicycle Man by Alan Say. When I was a small boy, I went to a school in the South Island of Japan. The schoolhouse stood halfway up a tall green mountain. It was made of wood, and the wood was gray with age. When a strong wind blew, the trees made the sound of waves, and the building creaked like an old sailing ship. From the playground, we could see the town, the ships in the harbor, and the shining sea. One fine spring day, we had our sports day. All the children and teachers were out in the playground long before the first bell rang. Did everybody remember to bring a headband? Asked Mrs. Morita. She was our first grade teacher. Eagerly, we showed her our headbands. They were red on one side and white on the other. Remember, we're on the red team, she told us. We swept the playground with all the brooms in the school. We tied colored flags and streamers to bamboo poles. We drew white lines on the ground with powdered chalk. Our parents came carrying tiered lunch boxes and kettles filled with tea. They spread their straw mats and sat around the oval track. When everything was ready, Mrs. Morita rang the bell. It was 9 o'clock. The principal stood on the platform and said, "Parents, children, my fellow teachers, let us remember that we are gathered here in the spirit of sportsmanship. Whether we win or lose, let us enjoy ourselves." We cheered and clapped our hands. The youngest children were the first to race. We lined up 6 at a time at the starting line. Ready, set, go! Mr. Oka, the art teacher, boomed at us. We first graders leaped out and dashed around the track. Parents and teachers ran alongside of us, yelling encouragement. The older children waved flags and headbands and shouted at the top of their lungs until the mountain echoed the noise like rumbling thunder. The winners went up to the judges' table and received prizes from the principal. The prizes were wrapped in white paper and tied with gold threads. Inside, there were oranges and rice cakes and pencils. By the time the 6th graders finished running, it was lunchtime, and that was the best part of the sports day. My mother had cooked for 2 days, preparing the good things to eat. The layers of lacquered boxes held pickled melon rinds and egg rolls, spiced rice and fish cakes. There were apples and peaches and sweets of all sorts. In the afternoon, we had the tug of war and piggyback races. After that, the grown-ups had a race of their own. Parents and teachers paired up and tied their ankles together with headbands and hopped around the oval. We screamed with delight when they stumbled and fell on top of one another. We were cheering Mrs. Morita and someone's father when a hush fell on the playground. We stopped moving and talking and stared toward the gate. 2 strangers were leaning over the fence and watching us. They were American soldiers. One of them was a white man with bright hair like fire, and the other man had a face as black as the earth. They wore dark uniforms with neckties, soft caps on their heads, and red stripes on their sleeves. They had no guns. "Look how black he is! Look at that red hair," he whispered. The war had been over for only a short while, not even 1 year. American soldiers had a base in the harbor, but we had never seen them in our mountain. I felt afraid. The foreigners smiled and waved at us. When the black man cleared the fence and came toward us, we all drew back and stared. He was the tallest man I had ever seen, and his clothes, such sharp creases, and his shoes shone like polished metal. The soldier walked in huge strides toward the school entrance where the principal's bicycle stood. He pointed at the bicycle and turned to the judge's table. The principal stood up slowly. "He wants the bicycle," someone said. "Maybe he doesn't know what it is." "No, he wants to ride it." The principal walked up to the American and bowed. He looked like a small boy greeting a giant. The tall man gave a deep bow, almost bumping heads with the principal. We started to giggle. We watched them talk to each other with their hands. The principal pointed at the bicycle, then at the man, and nodded. "Yes, you are welcome to ride my bicycle," he seemed to say. The soldier put the palms of his hands together and smiled. The man took the bicycle by the handlebar, kicked up the stand, and rolled it out to the center of the playground. He motioned us to make room and then called to his friend. The other American was nearly as tall as the black man. He took off his cap and saluted us with a big bow. We giggled and bowed back. The strangers spoke to each other and nodded. The black man took off his jacket and handed it to the white man. Then he hoisted a long leg over the bicycle and began to pedal it around and around in a widening circle. His friend waved the jacket like a flag and cheered him to go faster. Suddenly, the rider yanked on the handlebars and lifted the front wheel off the ground. "Oh, look," we stirred. "How can he ride like that? What an athlete," said the art teacher. The red-haired man was the ringmaster. He ran alongside of the bicycle and shouted encouragement. The rider went round and round with only one wheel, zigzagging this way and that. We were amazed. Then he rode backwards. He sat on the bicycle with his body turned around. He had to twist his neck to see where he was going. He worked his long arms and legs like a huge dancing spider. He howled with wonder. The man rode backwards, then forwards, twirling the front wheel like a spinning gyroscope. He shouted something to the ringmaster, who grasped the carrier and began to push as fast as he could. Then he let go. The bicycle shot forward with great speed. The rider stood up on the pedals and, leaning on the handlebar, put both his feet up. On the carrier, he was in the air. His cap flew off and his necktie fluttered in the wind. He seemed to be flying free, cruising like an enormous dragonfly. "Oh, oh," we exclaimed and gasped in turn. When the bicycle finally came to a stop, the playground roared with clapping of hands and shouting. The rider panted heavily and laughing. The ringmaster rushed up to him and lifted him in a bear hug. We mobbed around them, jumping and yelling. The principal struggled through the crowd and the black man reached out to him. They gripped each other's arms like old friends. The principal raised his arms to quiet us down. He took the soldiers' hands and led them to the platform. There, he whispered something to Mrs. Merida as she brought him the largest box from the prize table. The principal stood on the platform and held out the box to the Americans. He looked like the emperor awarding a great champion. The bicycle rider received the gift with both hands and lifted it high above his head. Then he turned to the crowd. "Arigato, arigato," he said. "Thank you, thank you." The whole school bowed to him and shouted for joy. The Americans put their caps on and walked out the gate with their prize. They went down the mountain, arm in arm, waving and laughing. We followed them with our eyes until they disappeared around the bend in the road.
All right, boys and girls, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed both stories, and don't forget to vote.